right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order our public hearing for the 2023 budget on Thursday, December 8th, 2022 at 10 a.m. Our first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. The purpose and process of the meeting. Today's meeting notice of which was duly advertised is for the purpose of reviewing the proposed budget for Delaware County for calendar year 2023 in the total amount of $361,497,487 provided for a tax levy for operating expenses at a rate of 2.491 mils on each dollar of assessed property valuation, or the sum of $0.2491 on each $100 assessed property valuation, and a tax levy for debt service at the rate of 0.508 mils for each dollar of assessed property, or $0.0508 of each $100 of assessed property valuation. Copies of the proposed budget have been provided to County Council members, and a copy has been available for the public review with the Office of the County Clerk. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes and will be heard at the end of the staff presentation, with our request that the person making remarks complete the sign-in sheet located at the podium. All right, our next item on the agenda is our presentation from our Executive Director, Mr. Lazarus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Council members. Wish you all a very good morning. Today we are presenting the proposed budget for 2023 to you for your consideration and discussion. I do want to begin by expressing my appreciation to the budget management team, to our department leaders and their fiscal teams, and to everyone who contributed to the development of the financial plan for the coming year. I want to give Ryan Herlinger a special call out as he developed the format and the icon for our budget navigator. Also want to thank all of you for your support throughout the year as we try to stay on course while navigating through the twists and turns and course corrections that need to be made throughout the year. The plan for next year continues to expand upon the strong foundation that's been built, staying true to the guiding values of transparency, accountability, equity, and sustainability. The 2023 submittal took us closer to achieving revenue and cost realizing and identifying performance outcomes for the use of funds that the public places in our hands. We also recognize that the upcoming year is a transitional one as we emerge from the shadow of COVID, both physically and fiscally. This change will require continued monitoring of the budget, and I want to especially thank Mr. Hayes and his team for the partnerships they've built with our agencies and with you to make sure that everything we do is both compliant and transparent. We look forward to walking through the budget with you, and we'll ensure that any comments we receive today are appropriately integrated. I do also want to say the budget document is greater than 450 pages, so we have chosen the highlights that I think are important and we think are important for you in the budget to consider, but we can certainly stop and pause as you deem necessary and appropriate to drill into the details. And Mr. Hayes and I will try and be responsive to your questions. My presentation will begin with a quick review of 2022, highlighting the significant accomplishments of the past 12 months. I'll hope to call out what is new in 2023 and provide an overview of each of the budget's 4 primary components: the operating budget, the Fair Acres Plan, the Capital Improvement Program, and the fiscal and grant-funded agencies. The fiscal and grant-funded agencies, which make up about half of the county's expenditures each year, are approved for implementation July 1st, but as we move towards a fully integrated approach to service provision and really the no wrong door approach to our services, it's important to present the whole picture. Funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, has also been a significant part of the budget through 2026, and I'll briefly touch on that current status. I did send an update that Ms. Hunter prepared, and I sent that to you yesterday. Finally, we have to acknowledge the risks and uncertainties that we face when we put a financial plan together, especially as we seek to return to some sense of normalcy as we move past the heavy hand that COVID has put on us. This year, 2022, has been a year of achievement, with many council priorities being realized. The images on the right side of the screen provide some of those highlights, starting with the top right picture, which features our county solicitor accepting the Governor's Award for Excellence in Local Government for administration of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This is one of two Governor's Awards that we received this year, the other recognizing the county's development of its sustainability plan. The middle image notes the first celebration of Juneteenth that the county formerly had, and it was robustly attended by our elected council members, our controller, the district attorney, a member of the Chester City Council, and Representative Scanlon. The third image represents the proud graduation of one of our cadet classes at George W. Hill. Under Warden Williams' leadership, and after the prison was deprivatized, we've been able to stabilize and increase the staffing and institute professional development programs. The remaining items on the list on this slide are equally important and significant: formation of the county health department, development of the Don Guanella property, the conduct of compliant and inclusive elections, investment in our DEI and sustainability initiatives, and rounding out our leadership team with strong professionals committed to thought and practice leadership. It's important to note that in rounding out that team, we brought in people who are experts in areas. We also recognized and promoted people within who also have that same degree of knowledge and expertise. This past summer, as part of the budget process and as we were moving into high gear, Council, the Executive Director, and the Deputy Executive Director held a goal-setting session. The primary outcomes were that sustaining excellence required a commitment to building a solid foundation, and that direction is woven throughout this upcoming year's budget. For many of us, 2023 looks to be the first normal year, but normalcy in operations is continually being redefined as we move from a pandemic to an endemic environment. We need to make improvements and document our processes for our internal support functions. We can better address the uncertainties in our budget through improved and continual collaboration. Investments will continue to be made in how we deliver critical core services to the community. We face a very difficult labor situation, so recruiting, retaining, and investing in our staff is vital. We're looking at providing a total compensation plan that is both competitive and contributes to the county being a workplace of choice. The all-in 2023 budget is just under $841 million, and that is down $35 million from 2022, primarily due to the current funding of fiscal agencies, which reflects the conclusion of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, but that budget changes throughout the year, and when we get to that point, Ms. Garrison has joined us this morning to talk about how funding levels are increased throughout the year. The budgets the Council will adopt at the December 14th meeting are the operating budget, the Fair Acres budget, and the capital improvement program. Both Fair Acres and operating together total $361 million. That budget is essentially flat from 2022. However, and significantly, the capital budget, which Council will also adopt next week, shows almost a 25% increase, reflective of the pending investments in county facilities, parks, trails and open space, and modernization of our systems and equipment. While the overall increase, even with a relatively flat budget, there are changes and new items that are being introduced. The health department has been moved to the fiscal budget. We've budgeted a full year of expenses for the prison, which are actually $4 million less than what the cost would have been for a fully privatized operation. We're including 2 mergers to achieve both efficiencies and to raise the oversight and support of some of our smaller agencies. The scope of our information technology group will continue to make data more available and integrated, taking in records and archives, and continuing the evolution of our GIS team into a data and innovation center. The consolidation of assets from the training center and the former Community Corrections Group, enhances our emergency response capabilities. In this budget, we've also introduced goals and objectives for all agencies and have established a template for performance measurement for key internal service providers, which we will introduce for all agencies in 2024. This past year, we also added new benefits programs and looked at staff contributions as part of total compensation. The result is a better census of the employee database and a reduction in overall cost, while at the same time providing staff with expanded choices for their health care. It should be noted that we achieved an enrollment rate of approximately 95% during open enrollment, which is remarkable for an organization going through this process for the first time in several decades and for the very first time using an online portal. In talking to Marsh, our provider, a comparable rate for organizations in the same situation is about a 36% rate. We would not have been able to get to that point without the full participation and leadership of our team, starting with our team and section leaders and going all the way through our department heads, as well as the assistance from public relations, from the controller's office, from budget, and from IT. It is a marvelous success story and one that benefits the county and all of our staff. The budget includes both an across-the-board increase in compensation for staff and incorporates the adjustments in our collective bargaining agreements. We have provided a contingency line in the budget to account for pending labor agreements, other compensation adjustments that may arise, and other things that go bump in the night during the year. We're also transitioning away from reliance on temporary staff for our elections team, and that has no material impact to the budget. And finally, we've added a budget navigator tool to allow for more ready access to the budget, and that tool will be available on the county's website. Looking at the operating budget. The budget is complex. Funds are distributed among 13 different service areas and over 50 different agencies. 45% of the operating budget is dedicated to a combination of community justice and the court system. The primary driver in these areas are the full accounting for the cost of the prison and compensation increases in the public defender and the district attorney's office. The 10.7% increase in general government is attributable to investments in our personnel department, increased materials cost for administrative services, and modernization of our elections infrastructure. While an overall small increase, the community support budget reflects council's commitments to our military and veterans affairs programs and modernizing and becoming comparable to the thought and practice leaders in our area. As I stated previously, the reduction in benefits costs is the result of an improved census, the offering of a more diverse suite of healthcare options, and careful consideration of cost sharing. The increase in insurance cost is an estimate and it's conservative, reflecting that we know those costs will continue to increase. The grants and subsidy line decrease is primarily due to the elimination of budgeting for Visit Delco, which will still be paid, but it's not paid for out of the operating budget. So that's an adjustment that is due to how the funds flow. And then finally, public and council should consider that funding for IT, sustainability are supported by the capital program, and community support programs are primarily grant funded. One outstanding issue that still exists is some of the positions that were proposed to council on November 17th at the Personnel Board meeting were in the elections departments to move us away from reliance on what Mr. Allen would call permanent temporary positions. These new positions mitigate the need for interim and temporary positions. As you look at the replacement, there's no material net fiscal impact to the budget, but it does provide for better staff stability. I've included the estimated cost of benefits here so that we have a true comparison. And in the end, it's an estimated about $12,000 difference on those positions. However, that assumes the positions are filled all year long. So in the overall scheme of the budget, that's not material. Plus, in the current year, in 2023, we still will be able to fund some of these positions through the election security grant that the county received. It does, though, provide a reminder to us that as we move into subsequent years, we are going to have to address the cost of elections through the county's operating budget. On the Fair Acres side, the budget also shows generally no increase in expenditures. That's a tribute to the work that Mr. D'Amico and Mr. Travaglini have done with their staffs. They have increased their revenues by working with government to increase Medicaid reimbursements. They do have one outstanding collective bargaining agreement, which should be accounted for in the personnel budget that they've provided. It's also significant to note that through their leadership, the county operating subsidy has been reduced by about 50%, from just under $7 million to just over $3 million. So we should express our appreciation both to Bill and Joe for their work on that. On the capital side, there's a tremendous increase in the budget. Council last year judiciously decided to approve two lock-in rates for 2 years for borrowing, which, as we've seen, has proven to be very auspicious as rates have gone up well above the approximate 2% that we're going to incur for the second tranche of funding. I want to remind us all that these are not annual funds, so some of the work that will go forward is still part of the FY22 program. The total of the 5-year CIP is $151 million. The work that you see is reflective of the investments that Council's made in Public Works. All of our departments participated through submitting statements of need and through the steering committee to come up with a capital improvement program that addresses our needs and, to be honest, is a bit front-loaded and very aggressive in terms of its execution. And then walking through the CIP, just to touch on what's in there for our priority projects, we integrated and fully integrated the facilities condition and needs assessment into the CIP plan. That was something we strived to do since we received the plan last December. The kitchen roof, HVAC improvements at George W. Hill are all included in the CIP, as are the roof replacement, ADA upgrades for the courthouse complex. We have structural repairs down in the garage here in the Government Center, elevator replacements both here and at Fair Acres. We hope to complete the Building 8 renovations, the floors 10 to 12 at Fair Acres, as well as the kitchen. There are 911 center HVAC upgrades for the server rooms so that we can get away from a temporary solution. We have programmed monies for improvements at 2 West Baltimore to accommodate the county's needs. And finally, we've made some significant progress with Media Borough on moving forward on the Orange Street lot. From Parks, Trails, and Open Space, last night Council discussed and approved the award of Greenways Grant Round 3 awards. That is funded in the 2023 budget. There are improvements to Rose Tree, Upland, and Spedley Parks included. There are the Phase 1 improvements at Don Guanella as well. We have reserved funds for open space and land purchases, and then the Chester Creek and Media Smedley Trail improvements are the significant projects for Parks, Trails, and Open Space. Oops. On the transportation fleet and IT side, we are looking at multi-agency fleet replacements. Last night we also presented to Council the award for electrification of our fleet and the announcement that over 20 EVs will be arriving on our doorstep. One of the things that has to go with that is a comprehensive EV infrastructure charging plan, and that is included in the CIP for next year. On the IT side, there are funds for cooling units and security camera installations. We are continuing the county's investment in technology, and we are planning with the controller on the replacement for SAP. Touching briefly on the fiscal budget, there are some points in here I think I'd like to touch on. One is the decrease in the emergency rental assistance program. Highly successful, as I mentioned before, we received acknowledgement for it, but that program is coming to an end, and that money has been shown in the fiscal budget for the county. Also, there are, the decreases that are shown are really a matter of how funding is received. And as I said before, Ms. Garrison can help respond to some of the questions that you may have. The other services line at the bottom does include the agencies that are shown: adult and family services, the medical assistance, transportation, library funds, emergency medical services, and the Office of Housing and Community Development. On the ARPA side, in terms of what we had programmed and put into the report we submitted to the Treasury, you can see the distribution of funds among replacing lost revenues, administrative costs, economic impacts, public health, premium pay, and infrastructure. Allocations are reversible. They add up to the total amount that we received under the grant, which is the $110 million. Nothing goes forward with an ARPA without council approval. So as we look at the next slide, we can see that out of the $110 million, about half of it has been obligated, $52 million. Of that total, we spent just under $17 million. So we have to make sure that we constantly monitor the progress of those programs. As a reminder, the funds have to be obligated by December of 2024 and fully expended by December of 2026. The investments that have been made have been prudent. They support the community very well, and we'll continue to bring those back to council as we've done in the past. Moving a little bit to risk and uncertainty in some of the areas of concern. The budget is a snapshot of where we are right now. We know that throughout the year things change. So on a personnel side, we're going to continue to experience turnover due to retirements. Compensation costs are increasing due to our need to maintain competitiveness in a very tight labor market. The across-the-board increase that's programmed into the budget is 3% for non-represented, and then the represented staff will be compensated in accordance with the terms of the collective bargaining agreements. We need to continually invest in training staff, integrate new systems, and update our business practices so that we can achieve efficiencies. We're going to be affected by inflation and rising costs. You saw that in the administrative services budget. Inflation and supply chain issues place pressure on non-personnel costs, and it also impacts the availability of materials and supplies. The county over the longer run may not be able to meet its long-term needs without increasing revenues. That's not just looking at our primary source of revenue, which are property taxes, but also looking to be creative, to find partners, and to look for grant opportunities. So the term thought and practice leadership is one that is a guiding principle for us to always be at the forefront and help to shape policy at the state and federal levels. On the county infrastructure side, many of our building systems are experiencing failures, both intermittent and sometimes permanently, and they do necessitate costly repairs, and we've tried to address that through the capital improvement program. Our information systems are in need of upgrading and updating, and we look forward to working with Ms. Phillips on the proper replacement and timing of that replacement for SAP. And then on the health and wellness side, we do look at closure and downscoping of public health resources throughout the county, and the county may need to step in some places. So we need to make sure that all of our citizens and community members, particularly those in high-risk areas, have high-quality health care available to them. So from where we are now, after today, we'll incorporate any additional changes that council will provide. Council will consider the budget for adoption at its meeting next Wednesday. Staff inputs that budget into the financial system prior to December 31st. And then throughout the coming year, budget staff will monitor and work with our operating departments to maintain and manage the budget to stay within the guideposts that council has established. So at this point, Mr. Hayes and I are available for any questions and discussion that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lazarus. Any questions or comments from council?
I have two questions. First is regarding elections, and I want to thank Mr. Allen for putting this together. His plan is so good that Chester County has actually adopted it, to the structure and organization. And I think his goal of trying to make sure we have permanent employees instead of long-term temps is sort of consistent with the personnel policy that we've discussed at prior meetings, where I know it was the intention that the county not keep people as temporaries through our agencies longer than 6 months, unless it was clearly a short, like a 1 or 18 month, 1 year or 18-month type of a role. And for elections, that's not true, at least not for the roles that he has identified in his plan. But what I really wanted to raise for council and for Mr. Allen's consideration and for Mr. Hayes's consideration is, can we, and it would obviously be rolling and have to be updated for each year's budget, but can we get a 4-year funding cycle for elections, taking into account, I mean, obviously, there's always going to be variations that we can't see, like ballot questions, that might come up, and, or a super highly contested state election of some kind. But we know, generally speaking, that there are going to be certain patterns to the elections with 2 odd-year election cycles and 2 even-year election cycles, culminating every 4 years in a presidential election, where the budget is going to be more, because there's going to be a need for either reallocating county resources in the form of overtime or bringing in outside resources. And I think from a planning perspective, putting his changes into perspective, and also we are foreseeing, I think, some savings if we are able to do some precinct consolidation and other things. But I guess what I'm looking for is, I know there's a strategic plan in elections, and I know there's a cyclical flow to these things. And sort of saying, well, this year's budget compared to next year's budget isn't really the right comparison, because the 2024 budget compared to the 2023 budget is going to be very different. So, or maybe it's a 2-year cycle, odd year, even year. But I'm just asking that when we get the budget proposal, and maybe as part of there could be a footnote or something that we're attracting, because I know Mr. Allen's thought about it, and I'm not asking him necessarily to think about it in detail, but I think it's going to be helpful for us to appreciate the variation from year to year.
So, thank you, Councilmember Ruther. A couple thoughts. Every year in January timeframe, Ms. Phillips and I collaborate on the GASB 54 compliance issue to set aside and reserve funds. And certainly reserving funds for elections it's something that we should consider. I would be cautious, though, about coming to the conclusion that odd-year elections are less costly than the even, because as you know and you've pointed out to me, the number of ballots that are required during those years is a lot greater. So some of those costs are even more. But I do think it's prudent for us to look and see and put some money aside for the upcoming 2024 election, which we know will be one that has high participation in it. So I think that makes a lot of sense to do that as well. So we should address those matters. The one thing on slide number 9 is I do need some direction from council on including these positions. And when we met on the 17th of November, these positions were taken out because there were some questions, and legitimately so, about how much have we spent on temporary positions. And Mr. Allen, along with Mr. Hayes, went back and looked at and put together how much was spent, particularly on the Monarch contract. And the challenge in that was that much of that was provided for through CARES funding and other sources of election funding. So through their diligence, they were able to come up with what the cost was, and that's what's shown here. So I bring this forward with the recommendation that we do adopt it and put it into the budget.
Yeah, I would support that, and I thank you for verifying, kind of an assumption that I'd made, which is that these positions, all in would be pretty much in kind, and it sounds like it's close. If anything, there's a little bit of a decrease in cost by moving those employees to the payroll, if we're able to do that, along with the other restructuring that you're talking about, which I know is a lot of it is just it's restructuring and adding a couple of things. So I'm in favor of that, and I guess whenever Mr. Martin tells us it's in order, we could.
Well, yeah, I'm just jumping in to point out that that specific item was not on the agenda, and this is a hearing as opposed to a meeting. I think what I understood the executive director to say is that it's his recommendation that these items be included and his tentative plan to include them in the budget that will be in front of you. Is it included here, or would it have to be adjusted to?
It's not. There's no fiscal impact because we can cover this out of the election security grant, but there is getting the positions added into the budget, which we can bring that back at a subsequent personnel board meeting, but it's helpful to get those.
But is there an adjustment in the bottom line for the elections department to reflect this?
There'll be a plus and minus. We'll have to add the cost and then show the transfer back out.
So I think the suggestion would, or my thought would be that the executive director is informing council it's his intent
Right.
to make that adjustment. If members of council disagree with that, they should share that perspective with the executive director, talk among yourselves one-on-one, but not in a quorum setting, in order to communicate that disagreement if it were to exist.
Can I ask just a procedural question, that if you're going to do that, in order to allow him to put the plan into action, is it possible to add those positions to the personnel? You know, if that is the procedure that Mr. Lazarus chooses to pursue, is it possible for him to add those positions to the personnel board meeting for next week?
It's possible, presuming the chair approves the agenda items on the personnel board agenda.
Okay, well, that's a thought, then. Things will take their course. Can I ask, will we have an opportunity, or is it better, there's an item that has come up that's been in discussion, I know, with Ms. Floyd as a matter of the capital improvement plan, but I'm not sure is on the capital improvement plan. And it would be a funding obligation of the county for next year. And this is, I've had some conversations with people. This is about the matching dollars for the federal earmark for the Main Street project in Darby Borough, where there was a question about how that funding, that matching fund was going to be met. And I'm happy to talk to Ms. Floyd about that, but if there is a need for the county to fund that match, is that something we should be talking about here, or is that something to take up with Ms. Floyd?
I think it depends. We'll certainly take it up with Ms. Floyd, but I think it depends on what the cost is. The capital program does have a $3+ million contingency line.
It would be $250,000 that would have to be expended next year.
So I would give Ms. Floyd the courtesy of talking to her about it, because we don't want to double count money that's in that contingency line. And in the past, when we've made a change to the capital program, we've brought it back to council to reallocate among the different projects, and we could do that as well. So
Yeah, this is a matter that's been discussed with her, and it actually will pay. It'll return a considerable amount, as we would be cooperating with PennDOT to allow additional funds to come in. There would be a substantial return on it for the county, but there is a need to make sure that the cash could be dispersed in the next calendar year.
So I don't think we need to make the change in what's being presented to council. We can address changes in funding in the CIP as they come up during the year, as we've done in the past, and bring those back, because they don't raise the debt service at all. It's just funded within the plan. We can make that change at the time when it's needed. And as I said, we do have a contingency line that we can use.
All right, well, then I will, I think you're right. I think it's one way or the other. It's probably something that we can accommodate. So thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the elections. I believe Mr. Hayes had some comments on.
Good morning, members of council. I just really wanted to give a point of clarification. Now, the temporary, as I mentioned during the personnel board meeting on November 17th, the funding for those temporary positions have never actually been budgeted. they've been using offset from like the elections board, or we would have to reclass expenditures to the elections grant. But I just want to be clear that there's no funds budgeted in this current budget for Monarch. So even though we're expending the funds, there are no funds budgeted. That's what I wanted to be clear about. So it's not like we're switching out. There's a negative in that line
this
item,
money.
which, say again?
Essentially, you're going to have to add this money
Exactly.
because we had
So
not
that's the only
actually.
thing I want to be clear to council.
Yeah, but the point is, we may not have to add the money until, I mean, and again, this is just to understand the offset, which is part of the budget, so I think we can discuss it. But my understanding is those costs are going to be incurred one way or another in 2023. There is money available to incur them right now because of the state grant. There may not be a state grant in the subsequent fiscal year of the state, in which case, for the 2024 budget, we would have to put that money in. I guess that leads to a larger question, which is not on today's agenda, except in the context of the consideration of the budget request, which is, do we think we need to expend those monies to continue to run smooth, secure, and accurate, timely elections in Pennsylvania? And if we do, then the question is not, do we have the source of money, but can we afford not to spend it, is the question.
From the fiscal standpoint, the budgetary standpoint, we have about half of that $2 million election security grant still available to us. It has to be spent by the end of the state fiscal year, which is June 30th. So what we really need to do is sit with Mr. Allen and with Mr. Hayes and figure out which of those costs can be funded up front during the year and see if we can kind of front load the year's compensation. So I think that's the conversation we'll need to have should this be on the agenda at the Personnel Board next week.
And so just to make sure I'm following you, so essentially what you're saying is that at some point this entire total will have to be added to the elections department, but 200,000 of it is going to be for these new positions, and then at some point in time, once the grant funding runs out, we will have to add the amount for Monarch to the elections budget, so from where it is right now, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. There's a little bit of kick the can down the road on the requirement that's involved. So 2023, we can mitigate the impact. But as we look at 2024, once those positions are established, they'll become an obligation that we have to include in the budget.
Yeah, so I think this does come down to a bigger question, which is, I think the chair has raised a very good point, which is we would be incurring ongoing obligations to the employees, which is the whole reason we have the Personnel Board, to make sure that council is weighing in on the creation of jobs and the ongoing obligations that go with them, because they're expected to be permanent. My question for council, and I guess Mr. Allen has made his feelings clear, is if we are going to have to continue under state law to administer 2 simultaneous elections, recognizing we can probably get some savings from updating precincts and stuff, can we safely and securely and expeditiously conduct our elections under the current state law requirements without these positions, whether they go through Monarch or they go through the county? And if the answer is we have to figure out how to do this, and whether they're through Monarch or through the county is either way, we're going to spend the money, then we're going to have to find a way to fund it. But I agree with you, we're kicking the can down the road simply because we can't be sure we will have the same source of funds in 2024. Well, actually, the 2023-2024 state fiscal year.
Well, I have some general comments about the budget, but I think they're more appropriate for council comments. In terms of questions, like in the weeds questions, I only have really one. And, we've spent several weeks in the weeds, so we're hopefully getting to the end of our questions. And that is, I'm having trouble finding the chart of our fund balance and where that stood before this year. We're spending $13 million this year out of our fund balance. Last year, I think we spent, with our amended budget, I think 11. And I'm sure it's in here, I'm having trouble getting my hands on it. Can you advise where that is in the budget?
The table of other accounts is at the end of the narrative for Volume 1, before you
Okay.
get into the appendices. The amount there is is taken from the annual report for the end of year 21. We won't have the end of year 22 until the books are closed. And it'd be a little bit hazardous to forecast and guess right now where we're going to wind up at the end of the year this year.
Well, the table of, I'm still having trouble finding it. What is the total at the, in our 23 budget, what do we have left in our fund balance?
James, you have the calc? The end of year, after we take the funds out of the fund balance for funding 23, I believe that number is around $69 million. But
So you're talking about what?
we ended last year in the area of around $83 million.
Right.
And we're looking at next year's budget, taking out 13 million, so that'll
Right.
bring it down to 69 million or so.
Okay, and we want to have that at 25% of our expenses, right? What is 25% of our expense? I mean, is $69 million well within that?
It would be 25% of operating.
Operating budget,
Right.
so it'd be $72, $73 million,
Okay.
just in ballparking.
Yeah, I think it's like 73 million.
Yeah.
Okay, great, that's very helpful. I'm sorry, I have just had a hard time finding that table.
So I feel reasonably comfortable that will be there, but I can't give you any numbers, so reasonably comfortable in showing the numbers are two different things.
Okay,
And just to be clear, that's using the 2022 budgeted use of fund balance as opposed to what we actually think that's going to
That
come
is
out
correct.
at.
That is correct. Very good point. So what it is, that's using what we ended last year with, which was, the total was 84 point something million, unassigned was 69 point something. So yeah, using that number as the basis number, because obviously we haven't closed out 2022 yet. So yeah, that is correct.
And so far through October, I think we were running ahead of budget in that regard.
That's at our last check. Yeah, but of course, a lot of things are not done until the end of the year doing closeout. But the number that I gave you in October, at the end of October, revenues sources were higher than expenditures at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
right,
And
I mean,
just-
this is just a very important number this particular year, because we hope to go out to the bond market. And, having that a comfortable 25% is going to be very important. And it looks like we are fine on that front.
Just as the number from the, what's called the GA, the government accounting,
It's 235.
it's 2 to 3 months. So we put it 3 months in when we talk to the rating agencies, and I'm pretty comfortable we'll be there when it's time to go out for bonds. So the controller needs the space to close the books out. Generally, we'll get the report end of May, beginning of June, and we'll know better at that point. But I'm reasonably comfortable we'll be there.
Okay, great. That was my only detailed question, and I'll save my comments on the general budget for council comments.
GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association. Sorry for the brain freeze.
Any additional questions or comments from council?
This is, well, not about what's been presented so far. I have some other questions about some areas where I know we haven't always done a particularly great job of, I shouldn't say we haven't done a great job. There have been situations where there have been some items that did not get picked up, mainly because they weren't necessarily budgeted in a consistent manner across different departments. Like, for example, lease expenditures. Sometimes the departments had it in their budget, sometimes it was someplace else. Are we confident, maybe this is really for Mr. Hayes, I know he's had a team that's been out working with the departments, that we've kind of cross-checked all of our leases and are confident that we've picked up those, certainly anything that would be material to this budget has been picked up and accounted for that's all been dealt with. And contingencies for I know Mr. Martin works with Mr. Hayes, I'm sure, on the reserves for everything from lawsuits to real estate tax appeal refunds that we might have to, and that you're confident that there's been a review and we've gotten a reserve that's going to be, again, at a materiality level is comfortable.
And there's no pending litigation which, in accordance with the appropriate accounting principles, requires a designated reserve.
That's what I just wanted to make sure that we checked all those boxes, because I know over the last 3 or 4 years, and again, there's been a lot of change and stuff, and things have not always been accounted for in a consistent manner budgeted for in a consistent manner that we've, I know our accounting, at the end of the day, we get it right. I just wanted to, those 2 areas in particular, sometimes there hasn't been the necessary coordination. So I just wanted to check and make sure that we check the box on those. And I know Mr. Hayes has been all over insurance.
I am comfortable the number Mr. Hayes put in there will cover our insurance costs for the coming year.
Are there any additional questions or comments from council?
Madam Chair, could I ask one question?
Yes.
You're educating me. On the ARPA chart, on replacing lost revenues, you had a portion of the replacing lost revenues that was indicated as being obligated but not expended.
Correct.
Can you help me understand that?
We put funding in this year's budget for a couple things. One was for the $8.04 million that we put in for lost revenues that we're probably not going to need. There's also another $2.6 million, I believe, that was put aside for some design contracts for both Building 1 and I think it was Building 19 out at Fair Acres. That money hasn't been put under contract yet.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair and council members, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lazarus. All right, so at this point, I will open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment on today's budget?
Joanne Phillips, County Controller. I don't think I need my address right, so. I just had a couple of comments. One thing, I do appreciate all the work from Mr. Hayes and Mr. Lazarus on the budget, and Ms. Garrison as well, and everyone on the team. Just a recurring theme. We're doing so much for our employees in terms of trying to get the compensation rate. I'm asking, can you please get us focused on the condition of our building? This building, the courthouse, the ladies' rooms, the men's rooms, no touch. We've gone through COVID. Every other facility that I'm part of has gone through a master change of making things no touch and implementing health measures that protect employees. And I think there's an opportunity there. So I'm going to, again, I know Mr. Lazarus and I joke about it because I keep asking for it, because I would take you on a tour of facilities that I can get into, and I really do think there's an opportunity for a small expense to get that fixed. And I know the HVAC is under review, and Ms. Floyd and Ms. Locke are working on that, but it can't come too soon because we vary from 60 degrees in our office to 90 degrees on any given day. So that was just one thing. The other thing is I wanted to say on the SAP replacement that's coming to council, it's not really a replacement, it's a needs assessment to see where we go and what the next generation is, whether it will be SAP or another product, but you'll have that on your agenda. And I also wanted to just say, with respect to closing the books, just a reminder that you don't live in this, but we have a 13th period for paying bills. So right now, we don't have all the bills in, even though it's December. We won't even see those bills until, that could be the end of January. That is the way it works. We will be asking everybody, get your bills in so that we know where we are. But it doesn't come until really later in the spring as we do our financials. So any encouragement from management and Mr. Lazarus and his team and Mr. Hayes to get those bills in, because I know Mr. Hayes really wants them in so we know where we are. We can encumber the contracts and start the new year. So with that being said, we look forward to a new year. And I do think the contingency line for the salaries was a great idea, and it really will make it more realistic for what has to happen in a year. So thank you for all your work.
If I could just respond, Ms. Phillips has been a great and patient partner in a lot of areas. The improvements to the restroom facilities and the government center and courthouse complex is included in the scope for the ADA improvements for the courthouse and for this building. So it's under design, and I would expect that we'll have that contract to council in the coming year. With regard to closing out contracts, I'm on board with Joanne as well, and we have been going through not only insisting on invoices being put forward this year, but as we go into next year, one of the key aspects of budgeting is making sure all the departments lay out their contracts so that as soon as we come to council, that money's encumbered, but even before that, the funds are pre-encumbered so that we don't spend money twice. And it'll help us get to better cost accuracy anyway, because we won't have money floating around as a loose end. And what was your the point? Oh, closing of the books? So Mr. Hayes, his team has established a great relationship with the controller's team, and as we go into the next year, I think you'll see much better control over budget throughout the year.
Are there any additional public comments? Okay. Hearing none, I will look to council for comments. Mr. Womack?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to commend our Executive Director, Howard Lazarus, and also Mr. Hayes and his team for the job that you had done in bringing this budget forth to council. We know it was a tough battle. We know there was a lot of things that you had to do as far as working with the various departments where some cuts had to be made. And even in making those cuts this year that we have seen that we got a lot done, we're able to move forward a lot of different things and a lot of different projects that have went forth. And based on that, we know coming in 2023 that we will continue to make changes, and we hope that we can continue to do it at a moderate level where therefore there is no excessive expenditures that will be placed upon. And, also want the public to know that a lot of this stuff is being done and have not increased any kind of revenue or taxes upon them as well. So we want to continue to build. I heard with our controller, Ms. Phillips has stated, and I share those same concerns with you as well, Ms. Phillips. And hopefully that we will find more resources that we can continue or start making those changes as well, because we want to make sure that we have a facility that's a safe environment even for our staff as well. So those are a lot of things that we look at doing, and also for our diversity program, I'm hoping that we can increase and continue to fund that as well. I know that there are some funding that has been there, and I know there is some that was allotted here in the budget. And I think Ms. Footman did a great presentation last night and has put forward a plan as far as moving forward in 2023. And I would like to make sure that we are able to help fund that program as well. And once again, I just want to thank everyone for the concessions you have made, the work you have done, and and moving forward, that we will continue to do so with this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. Ms. Ruther?
Yeah, I joined Mr. Womack in thanking our staff for the work that they've done. And I think, Mr. Hayes, really, he's only been here a little over a year at this point, I think. Isn't that right? And this is really his first budget cycle, and he's built and is training a strong team that's building relationships around the county. And that's really important, because I think what a lot of people don't realize is when we stepped in as a new majority with the first real big change in control in this county in generations, there was a lot of institutional memory loss as senior people, and even not just senior people, but excuse me, a lot of long-term employees left, and a lot of institutional memory left. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's part of a life cycle. But what it did mean was we have to rebuild and recreate these relationships, and that's happening. And I'm sorry, I didn't bring water with me today, but it's a dry air in here. But I think what this budget does, and it's still a work in progress until we pass it, and even then it's a work in progress, because throughout the year we may make adjustments as we move money around, as needs arise, as things we thought we were going to have to spend money on, we don't have to spend money on because a grant or something becomes available. I want to keep us focused on sort of what I see as our three roles in government. Number one, we've got to provide the services that we're obligated by law to provide. And we have to provide them at a professional level that meets the needs of our community. And when we talk about elections, that's one example. There are other other obligations we have to meet, and this budget certainly does that. Number two, and this is the prerogative of being elected and getting to sit up here, we need to implement policies that, in our judgment, improve the quality of life for our residents and foster positive development and redevelopment in our really largely densely built out county. And we also get to address unmet needs through efficient use of our available resources and through the use of funds which are available at historic levels right now to us as a local government, which is a huge advantage. But it's up to us to do that cost effectively and to put that money to work. And I know there are people who see us spending money and say, oh, what do you expect? It's sort of a tax and spend mentality. The truth is we are not, with this proposed budget, and I think even with any tweaks that we're talking about for this year, we're not going to be raising taxes. It's because we do have other funds available to us. Do I think we are making some decisions that are going to cause us to have to make hard decisions down the road? Yeah, I do. But things cost money. People notice that there's been inflation, that costs go up. Our costs are going up here at the county, just like my costs are going up at home. Every time I get an oil heating bill, I'm really conscious of that. Every time I go to the gas pump or the grocery store. Our costs here at the county are also going up. And we need to efficiently use our resources first. But what we also have to recognize is when we spend money, or I should say expend dollars, it's not spending. It's not just, sending your teenage kids to the mall with a credit card. What we are doing is investing. We're investing in rebuilding our human capital inside the county. We're investing in rebuilding the county's physical plant. We're investing in the long-term health and sustainability of the environment here in Delaware County, in our infrastructure and in our parks. We are investing. And I resent people using the word spending like it's not thoughtful or it's just tossing money away. We are investing. And I think this budget does that, and I appreciate the work that's gone into it. Thank you.
Ben?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will also start with some very well-deserved thanks. I think a lot of people, they just see the finished product, but just the amount of man and woman hours that go into putting together this budget is really extraordinary. So to all of our directors and particularly to Mr. Hayes, as Ms. Ruther said, the fact that you've only been here for about a year or less, I really commend the job that you've done. And I know sometimes you don't give answers that people want to hear, but I appreciate your candor. It's very important that the person who's in charge of the numbers has that sometimes brutal honesty about what they see. So thank you for the work you've done. You really have done a great job, and you've been we're very lucky that you came north and joined us here. I think overarchingly, last year, or really this year, has been a year of delivering on promises. We put in place some major building blocks that each of us had made a priority for our time on county council, whether it be establishing a public health department or taking back over direct control of our jail. These were massive changes to what Delaware County government looks like. When I look forward, when I look at this coming year, I really see it being somewhat playing a lot of catch up. And investing in areas that haven't been invested in. The controller talked about, parts of our infrastructure here that impact our workforce day in and day out that, haven't been invested in for a number of years, and we have to make those investments. When I look at the budget for this year, what I really see is a lot of making investments for a strong future. And that's both infrastructurally, it's, fixing roofs that are, beyond their point. It's fixing HVAC systems. But our most important asset is our people. Hands down, that's really what makes this government work, is we have so many great people who maybe could be making more in the private sector, but take those sacrifices because they care about being a public servant. And so we need to invest in our most important asset, which is our people. And while we've done a lot of that this past year, there's more to really do there to ensure that we're creating a place for employment that people really want to stay at long term. So it is a major investment, and as Ms. Ruther talked about, it's not just spending; it is investing, and investing takes money. So we have some challenges ahead, but I think this is a really tremendous step forward that this budget represents. So once again, thank you to our executive director and our budget director and all of our department directors who have brought this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Madden. Ms. Schaefer?
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a couple of comments I want to make, and they're very high level. We've spent a lot of weeks, months in the weeds, and these comments are really just high level about this budget. First, I want to make comments about the process and sort of the product at where we are right now. And I want to remind everybody where we were 3 years ago, when all that the budget was I think 10 to 15 pages of high level lines. There was no detail, and there was no way to get any detail. That's all we got. And we have strived, whichever is right, to get to a point where a member of the public who wants to understand what their taxpayer dollars of funding can get on the website and see precisely each department what they're spending. And understand the priorities of this council, of each department, the goals of this council, each department. It's all there for someone to access, or at least it will be at the end of today. And it's actually pretty easy. You can go through the table of contents, click on the thing you're interested in, and you will get to that detail. So it's taken many years and a lot of work from our budget department, and especially in the last year under the leadership of Director Hayes, to get to this point where we have a budget, process, and product that we can be really proud of. So I want to just acknowledge our staff for that, all the work that put in for this council for persevering and demanding it. And I want to present it to the public that you have this available to you. Take advantage of it. Next, I want to talk a little bit about this particular budget. And I view this budget as another step, a transitional step in our journey towards stabilization. Because this council took over and a lot of things happened that really, I mean, for lack of a more technical word, made the budget wacko. We had a pandemic. We had the whole entire world turn upside down. We also brought transformational change to the way this government operates. We added a health department. We took on a prison. We, unrelated to the pandemic, had an entire department, our juvenile detention department, disappear and are in the process of rebuilding it. And we've just generally overhauled the entire government that we are presenting to you by investing more in our workforce. I mean, our personnel costs have skyrocketed because we're paying our workforce what they are worth in the market, which is new. It's new in this county. We have professionalized operations in every department, from IT to being able to do things online, even in our personnel department with our hiring. And we have really focused on important issues like diversity, inclusion, and sustainability, all new approaches to government. So all of that has been going on in the last 3 years, and it has made our budget a challenge. And it is a process to stabilize after all of these changes take place. And we are in the middle of that process. We are very lucky that going through this process, we do have excess funds. We have funds from prior fund balances, generous fund balances, and we have ARPA dollars that we can use to address some of these issues that were caused by the pandemic in our staff. So we are in the position to make these transitions, make these investments while we have this cushion. Very, very fortunate. But over the next couple of years, we've got to get to the stabilization. We've got to get to the point where what we're taking in is what is going out. And I have every confidence that we are going to do that. Because a lot of these factors that have caused us these fluctuations are going to stabilize, and some of those are, our revenue picture will be much more clear. God bless Director Hayes. The revenue projections in this budget are very, very conservative, and that's the way they should be. But because we don't know, but in my heart of hearts, I think that our revenues are going to be much more robust than what is showing in this budget. You can't budget like that. You should never budget like that. But after a year or so, we will know whether we can stabilize in that direction. And then a lot of the other anomalies will stabilize. The Juvenile Detention Center, where we are losing revenue, that will stabilize. Our Act 148 revenues that come in when we deal with those, our other intergovernmental revenues that come in when we deal with some of our staffing issues, especially in the Domestic Relations Department, that will stabilize and those revenues will look better. Our insurance revenues, I believe, will be more in our favor. Again, we're budgeting very conservatively, but I believe the changes that we are making and have made will reflect positively on our revenue side and our expense side. And then our new departments, health and the prison, they, the startup expenses and the getting this going, that will stabilize as well. So I look forward to the next couple of years when we have the challenge of getting this budget to a balanced budget every year without dipping in to our reserves. But I'm very comfortable in the fact that we need to do that this year and perhaps next year while we stabilize this government, because we are and have and will transform this government for the better to serve our people. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. And I guess for me, of course, I echo the comments of my colleagues, and I want to thank you, Director Hayes and Mr. Lazarus. I know that this has been a really in-depth process, and we are still working on our process and building it, and you have just been here for barely a year. And so I thank you for taking on that challenge and really continuing to move us forward in our budgeting process. And this budget, as others have mentioned, is really building on what we have worked to accomplish over the last 2 years and building on those continued improvements. And it's another big step in the right direction. As Ms. Schaefer mentioned, we have really tried to take a deep dive into how we're compensating our employees to try to bring that up to market. We're getting there. We are not there yet, right? We still have employees who are making under $15 an hour, and that's something that we need to work to get them up to a better level. Our capital improvement plan is massive. It's taking on that facilities needs assessment that we have looked at and took a lot of time to look at every building and every place and space that we're in, and moving those projects forward to better accommodate our public and better accommodate our employees, and to make sure our buildings aren't going to fall apart around us. So I thank all of you who took a lot of time to work on that and putting that piece of it together. In general, we are continuing to move in the right direction and expanding our services, expanding our resources, and trying to provide more for the public. And that is really what this budget shows. And it's very detailed, and it shows you exactly what our plans are and what we're trying to do with every area within the government. So thank you all, because this was a massive team effort, from the Controller's Office to the Budget Office to our Sustainability Office to facilities to elections. Every department worked to put this together and to move this vision forward. So thank you all for that work, and with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you all.